dim light in the hallway. Heavens, how nervous she was. Her heart pounded so hard with anxious excitement over what she'd planned for tonight that each beat reverberated in her chest like cannon fire. She'd never attempted to seduce a man before, had never even considered such a thing, and her entire knowledge of how to please a man came from the barmaid she'd paid to tell her everything the woman knew about men, which had proven to be a great deal indeed. Yet Miranda had no choice but to carry out her plan tonight. Time was running out. She could no longer afford to wait for Robert to tire of temporary encounters with the string of women he was rumoured to have been involved with since university and crave something deeper and more lasting, or wait for him to realise that she could be the woman to give him that. He would be in London soon for the season, and once there he'd caught Diana Morgan, the General's lovely daughter he'd talked about since last fall, and the woman he'd spent the house party chatting with in quiet conversation, taking for turns about the gardens, waltzing with tonight. If Miranda didn't take this chance now, she would lose him forever. And how could she ever live with herself then, knowing she'd never dared to reveal her true feelings? She knew tonight could go horribly wrong, that he might not return the feelings she had for him, but she also knew it could go perfectly right, that he might finally see her as the woman she'd become and the seductress she could be, rather than as nothing more than the friend who had always been there, like a comfortable piece of furniture. How would she have lived with her cowardly self if she didn't at least try? Drawing a deep breath, she pushed herself away from the door and hurried down the hall, counting the rooms as she went. 2, 3, 4. This was it, the one the footman had told her was Robert's. She slipped inside the dark room, then closed the door and leaned back against it to catch her breath and somehow calm her racing heart. There was no turning back now. In a few minutes, Robert would walk into his room and find a masked woman draped across his bed. By the time her mask came off and he realised that the woman was her, he would be too enthralled to see her as simply plain Miranda Hodgkins any longer. She would show him that the same woman who was his friend could also be his lover and wife. And finally, he would be hers. Her eyes adjusted to the dark room, lit only by the dim light of the small fire his valet had already banked for the night. A new nervousness swelled inside her that had nothing to do with her planned seduction. Heavens, she was in Robert's room. In his room! His most private space. But instead of feeling like an intruder, she felt at home here, amid the large pieces of heavy furniture and masculine furnishings. As she moved away from the door and circled the room, her curiosity getting the better of her, she passed his dresser and lightly ran her hand over his things. His brushes, a pipe that she was certain had belonged to his father. Her fingers touched something cold and metal. She picked it up and turned it over in her palm, then smiled. A toy soldier from the set Richard Carlyle had given to the boys over 2 decades ago for Christmas, and long before she'd come to Chestnut Hill. Her throat tightened with emotion. The set had always been the boys' most prized possession, and several of the soldiers had been secreted away in Sebastian's trunks when he left for school, much to Robert and Quinn's consternation. That Robert would be so sentimental as to keep such a memento of his father. Just another reason why she loved him. Lifting the soldier to the faint smile at her lips, she circled the room to take in as much of this private side of him as possible. A typical bachelor gentleman's room, she supposed. Then she laughed with happy surprise when she saw the stack of books on the bedside table. Of course he was well educated. Elizabeth and Richard Carlyle had made certain of that for all their children. But Shakespeare, Milton, poetry. A warmth blossomed in her chest. She loved poetry too, and discovering this romantic side to Robert only made her certain that they belonged together. A noise sounded in the hall. With her heartbeat thundering in her ears, she raced to the bed, kicked off her slippers, and draped herself seductively across the coverlet. That is, as seductively as possible, because her hands shook as they pulled at her costume to spread it delicately over her legs, and to check once again to make certain that her mask was still in place. The door opened, and her heart stopped.